Welcome to Three Devs and a Maybe. Now introducing your show hosts, Michael Budd, Fraser Hart, Lewis Gaines, and Ed Mann.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Three Devs and a Maybe. I am Michael Budd and today I am joined by the ever-present Ed Mann. How are you, Ed?
Hello.
Hello. Are you
I
okay?
never know if that sounds good. The ever-present. It's like got nothing else to do or, always up for a pod is kind of his motto.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it that way. Sorry about that. How are you doing?
Oh, very good. Thanks, man. You?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. So I guess it's been, for me and you, it's been a couple of weeks since we did a podcast. I know you've done one recently. But yeah, we have got lots of things to discuss. So I've got a list of topics here, but is there anything you wanted to kick off with first before we go into those? Or
No, I think go for it, man. Let's rock and roll with this list.
Okay, so top of my list is the thing that I got burnt by this week, which was time zones, which was not fun. It seems really crazy. Like, I don't think we're the only country in the world that does this, right? But there's not a huge amount that do it. The British summertime thing.
I think you're right, because didn't you do some research on it and you realise why we still do it and why it first came into play?
Well, I did do the research and I completely forgot, but I think it was like mainly to do with like farming, right? And daylight hours and that kind of stuff. But I don't know. It feels like the world has moved on. And I think a lot of people are saying, well, there is a lot of support to get rid of it now, isn't there? I think I don't know. Perhaps it shouldn't have caused chaos, but for me, I mean, it's not like my application fell over, but I mean, basically some people were seeing the time wrong in my application. So, which I thought I was well covered for. I guess I should have used something like Carbon to try and check what would have happened like the week before.
I remember you saying, actually, when we were speaking about this during the week, a lot of money is invested and problems occur in the computing industry because of these time zone changes.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and wasn't it, it's the Great War that we started doing BST because of that, I think?
I don't know, because when I was reading, it was saying they stopped doing it during the war. I don't know. But I think it definitely had a role to play, but I could be completely wrong. Also, like, when I suddenly realised I had an issue, like, trying to research what to do, it wasn't like there was, like, anyone with a concise answer on what the best way to... It seemed like there was, like, definitely several ways to skin a cat. I guess the thing was, I think, like you say, like, the way that you store date times, as long as it's consistent, you can always do a repair on the front end, I guess, or, when you're doing your queries. But it is a bit of a minefield, especially dealing with multiple time zones as well.
Yeah, I think it's that whole being consistent, isn't it? For the audience, what actually then is your use case and what kind of caused you to have this problem?
So, I mean, basically the software that I've produced is like an analytics type software, and obviously our users need to know what time the visits came into their sites. So yeah, we were showing the times an hour out. My solution basically in the end was, there was a lot of people saying, never ever, store time in Europe, London. It should always be UTC. And in the end, I did change to Europe, London, and that seems to have fixed the issue for me. But the thing I read was if you set to Europe, London, then the British summertime thing is all sorted for you. You don't need to do anything. If you don't do it that way, there are all kinds of clever ways of doing it. Like, I think in the date time object that PHP has, it'll show you if you're in British summertime or not, and then you could work out the difference that way, all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you can do this using UTC, and I've got it horribly wrong, but I just couldn't find, when I was panicking, like, I need a fix. That was my solution, basically. I don't know. Like I say, I don't think I got the right answer, but I got an answer that worked.
I think that is kind of the case for a lot of these things, isn't it? It works for you and it's working now. But you would probably like to know like a more definitive answer, I guess. And like it's having the time to spend, to actually investigate it. And time zones are a scary thing and they are a weird thing. And I'd say, it is the consistency. As long as you're consistent, you can then work out, what the time is and things like that, because you can then say, as long as I'm in this fixed point, I can then work out, because I know you're dealing with people in different time zones on a day-to-day basis as it is. So displaying your time zones, you're storing them in one and then you're having to work out what their time zone is and stuff. So that adds an extra layer of complexity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I said to you, I mean, I could be talking rubbish here, but I think I was partially lucky in the fact that obviously we have our servers with DigitalOcean, and you can have service in London through them now. So I had that, and I think maybe that was potentially hiding some issues from me because it was like in my date time zone. I think maybe if I'd had a server hosted in, I don't know, in the States somewhere, maybe it would have made me realise my potential downfalls earlier because I would have had to have dealt with that issue. I don't know.
Because it's what the default operating system time zone is. So it probably takes from that. Definitely, I think Postgres does.
Yeah.
I'll put a couple of things in the show notes because I'm sure I've read some articles on this, kind of like the differences between storing the time zone in Postgres and not storing it, and the pros and cons of both. On Computer File and Number File, actually, they're really interesting YouTube channels, and one of the things that they discussed on there a while back was like the problem with time and time zones, and going into these crazy like different things, you know, that you wouldn't never think. Like we complain about an hour time zone change, but didn't you say that the initial proposal was to be 80 minutes or something, and it was going to go down in 20-minute chunks every week or some crazy thing? So I think we lucked out of that. That would have been extra complexity.
That's horrendous. Yeah, when they were first proposing the British summertime change, yeah, they was talking about sort of like incremental, like every week would be like an extra 20 minutes long or something. It was, I don't know, absolutely mind-boggling. But yeah. I would definitely welcome some good articles on the best practices with time zones.
And it's just what works for you as much as anything, isn't it? I think, and for your use case. I think there is still, but actually, I think there are still these crazy, wacky time zones, like in certain parts of the world. So I think this video definitely goes into it. It's been a while since I last watched it, but maybe I'm going to have to definitely watch it again to kind of refresh my mind on it all. Because it always, obviously, it rears its ugly head twice a year. When this actually happens. And then once that happens, you forget, and you go back on with your day. But time zones and Unicode seem to be like kind of one of the two of these things that you have to, as a computer, you know, as a programmer, you're going to get bit by eventually. It's just, one of those things. And actually, it's a really interesting one, actually, that so Unix, you know, the Unix timestamp, the epoch.
Yeah.
And it's the duration of seconds since 1970, I think it is.
Yeah.
That they've got this concept of like the end of time. Because a 32-bit integer, which is what typically they're stored the timestamp in, or these seconds past this fixed point, actually, you know, obviously will overflow eventually after like 2 billion or something. And there's a time in 2031 where essentially we will redo the 20th century because we'll go back from 19 something. So because of the fact, I mean, obviously what people have done now and operating systems have done now is they're catering for the fact of dealing with it in 64 bits, so we won't get this problem. But I'm sure undoubtedly there will be old hardware. And this is the thing, like, because systems, that it's not just operating systems like software, computer-based systems now, it's hardware, it's software on a chip, it's the concept of systems on chips and stuff, and it will be like your freezer will just pack up because it will you know, think it's 1901 again or something, and really, you know, it's 2031. So it will be an interesting time. We've got a while to wait. We shall see.
Yeah. Well, I know, like my client at the moment, the legacy application, he literally has to log on and change the time on the Windows server to get around the issue at the moment of the British summertime. So that's a bit horrendous. So hopefully the fix I've put in will make it a lot easier on the new application. So second thing, the results of the Twitter poll.
Oh yes.
So I won, right?
You won at losing.
Yeah.
You know, you to be fair, out of the how many was it? It was 7-3 or something. So out of the 10 votes cast, I think, you know, it was a heated vote battle.
I mean, it's been a lot more successful than our "What is better, Greece 1 or Greece 2" Twitter poll. I mean,
that was the one, wasn't it? I was trying to remember.
Yeah.
Oh dear, yeah. I think we obviously hit a nerve here, you know, PHP Storm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it turns out more people think PHP Storm, you should give it another chance. But yours are more vocal in the fact that, you know, saying that they prefer simpler tools. And I can't complain. I can't argue with that, really. You know, that using the right tool for the job, and if you want to keep it simple, keep it simple. It's what works for you as much as anything, because, you know, it's your kind of day-to-day environment. And as long as you're able to produce the code and you have the tools around you that you like, then that's it. I mean, I personally love the refactoring tools, and I love like the tests, you know, kind of infrastructure around it, dealing with PHP unit and how it works with that, and how it can deal with, you know, version control inside of it as well, which is nice. in PHP Storm, and actually there was a new version released this week, which I nudged you about because I know how much you love PHP Storm, and they've added even more things. They're very much dev happy people, they want to keep us happy, and they know what we want, and obviously they're developers at heart too, so a lot of the things they do is pain points for them, and then obviously it goes into the actual code base, so, and it's definitely shown by the tools that they do provide.
What would happen, just theoretically, right? Say PHP Storm, say you suddenly need to get a new license and they put the price up to £10,000 to use it for a month. How easy would it be for you to move away from it?
Very easy. I mean, really, yeah, because the code, it is still just files. It's just text files.
There's nothing application specific.
Yeah, the niceties, you could easily move to a text-based editor if you wanted, just a simple plain text editor if you wanted. There's no, I think that's the day, I think, when you look at Visual Studio maybe, and you look at like the WinForm stuff back in the day, or if there's anything proprietary that, you're creating that requires you to have that IDE. In PHP world, it's not. They're all just niceties. So you would miss like the refactoring tools. But then, as you say, but this is my argument though, is that, so you say you use something like Sublime, or you use Vim, but then what happens typically is you'll then add all these plugins on, and you'll add all these plugins such as like the refactoring tools or making test suites run easier, and you'll just get to a point where it's like, well, you're actually just making it into an IDE then. So my argument there is, then just use an IDE, but I can understand if someone does just want the simple, keep it simple, KISS kind of philosophy, and yeah, so either way, and it's whatever works for you.
Well, see, the people on my side are angry mob ready to take up arms, but I think like a lot of people I think our main criticism is that it is a bit of bloat, it doesn't run that great, but the people who've obviously voted for it don't experience that at all. So I don't know if that's just because you're all running on like really super high spec machines.
I don't think so. I think you need to give it another shot on your machine. It is Java, but I don't think there's a problem with it unless you're running on like a netbook or a NetApp box kind of thing. I think you'll be okay, and you are. That's the issue. Because I never really have any problems. Sometimes you'll get it will start like leaking memory a bit, or it will start using CPU like crazy, and you'll find that it's probably because it's trying to index like a lot of files and stuff like that. And the niceties it has like around Symfony stuff, like because there are extra plugins you can do even in the IDE world, and around Symfony and how it's able to quick, work out template files and service definitions and things. It just saves a lot of time, and that's one of the things. Like the saving in time, I value quite a lot now with it.
Okay, so the next thing, obviously been in the news this week with the terrorist attack in London, which was pretty horrible. One of the things that came out of that was, I think, Amanda Rudd from the government. Basically, I think she invited someone from WhatsApp to go and basically speak to her, because what it came out was that the terrorist had been talking about his plans on WhatsApp prior to the event. And she was saying, obviously, if we'd had access to that, we could have prevented it. Now, for me, like, I know I sort of studied this a bit at school, and you've got I believe, like the two different systems called Freedom From and Freedom To. So, like, Freedom To means, obviously you've got the freedom to go and commit a terrorist attack if you want to. Freedom From is we'll stop those terrorist attacks happening, but we'll take away a lot of your, privacy and stuff to accomplish that. And it's a very interesting debate, and probably split a lot of listeners on this show. It's very tricky, but my personal feeling is that those WhatsApp conversation encryption, that kind of stuff, it should stay encrypted, and they don't really have the right to access those conversations. But how do you feel?
I'm on the same side as you. I think the way that it was kind of portrayed is that it's like, well, we need a backdoor in, okay, and it's like, okay, so we can stop these really, really terrible bad things happening. And granted, no one wants these really terrible bad things to happen, but if you have a backdoor in, you're not only going to use it for those really terrible bad things, but other bad people then who have this backdoor into this system will use it for other things, nefarious other reasons, because of the fact that they've unlocked it. So what it shows to you, though, and the way that you kind of word it, and it's all in the media, is this military hardware grade encryption, like the way that they slogan it, and they kind of tag it as, and it's just, well, this is just peer-to-peer encryption. This is end-to-end encryption that is used, and it shows that in theory, they still can't break this. Like, this is still unbreakable. You know, whether there are obviously, because I think there's a lot of papers that came out because of WikiLeaks or something a while back, you know, about how they hacked TVs and stuff, pretended that they were on still or something, some Samsung devices. So, you know, obviously they know, and they are going to be hacking these things. But it shows maybe that they still can't hack this, and that it is unbreakable, and that the kind of publicity that WhatsApp use against, you know, the fact that they are using this into encryption and that it is unbreakable is true. I know there was a while back, actually, I think probably a month or two back, a guy who had said that he could, there was a loophole in the way that they pair the devices, I think, that a text or you know, text that were batched up essentially could be sent out unencrypted, because the idea is that you have a secret key. You know, you know each other's public keys, and you have your own signing ones. General, like, if you want to be really secure, what you would do is you'd go to that person's device, and you'd meet up in person. You'd then QR code it or whatever. You would make sure that you've got the exact key that they need. They have their public key, and then what would happen then is that I know that I verified it's that person. Over typical kind of conversations that we have, these keys just get sent over the wire themselves. So in theory, they could just be they could just be forged in that case. So you'd have to go into person and verify that you've got the exact key that person has. And there was this thing that if you got your phone and it was out of signal or something, or you put your SIM card into a new phone and then you'd done it that way, and it would actually send them unencrypted, like using a new key that could have been in theory hijacked, as opposed to waiting for you to say, hang on a minute. I'm doing it a bit disservice. I'll put that in the show notes as well, actually. And it's really interesting, but there is like a loophole that could have been. I don't know whether WhatsApp have actually patched that yet. So yeah, it's a very hard topic there, bud. Very hard topic.
It is really difficult, and I can imagine if we had someone on the show who'd lost someone in that attack, it'd be very difficult to argue to them that we should keep it. But at the same time, I mean, one of the things that really annoys me is the same thing you just picked up on, is, you know, when they were saying, oh, WhatsApp, you know, how dare they're using military grade encryption. It's the same encryption that everyone uses, and the reason, I mean, I'm going back to my uni studies here, but I'm pretty sure it was like the NSA who basically they invited the private sector to come up with their encryption algorithms, and they selected a winner. It was like a competition. That's
what they do. That's what they still do, I think. Yeah. It's the idea, and eventually encryption gets broken. Like, they had this with the Shattered or the SHA kind of thing, wasn't it? They had a collision, and the first ever collision for a SHA-1 hash or something, and it was amazing. It was a big, you know, kind of, whoa, you know, we're able to kind of make a contrived file that actually represents, that has the same hash as something else. And that was kind of a scary thing. But obviously things like GitHub and stuff, I'll put these in the show notes as well, is that they've gone around and they're able to work out if a file, you know, kind of has these kind of traits that looks like it's going to try and be one of these files that, you know, tries to do the SHA collisions. Yeah, encryption gets broken eventually, and it will be on to the next. And the best thing you can do is this kind of, you know, it's a game. I mean, it's always been a game. The whole thing back in Alan Turing, you know, back in World War II with the Enigma machine, it was the game of breaking the code. It's the idea that, you know, there's this problem that we're trying to solve. Having this competition of being like, okay, you know, who's got the best encryption and things like that, it promotes this kind of work to get to the best.
Yeah.
You want the bad people to be found, but the good people to be private. But it's all or nothing. You either have everything private or everything public. There's no in between. And that's where the shade of grey comes, where it doesn't really work at all.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a very difficult topic.
I know. That's probably the most like kind of politically driven conversation we've had on the show.
It is. So next on my list, I asked you whether I could bring it up on the show. You said, no, don't. I don't know anything about it. And I'm going to mention it anyway. We did say we would probably just ask if anyone wanted to come on the show and talk about it, maybe. The differences between Webpack version 1 and version 2. Because I accidentally updated my Webpack from version 1 to version 2, and then found things weren't working. And then in really panicking sort of way, I basically then just npm updated everything and managed to just muddle my way into a system where things were working again. But it was really, really hacky. Yeah, it would be good if we could get someone to come on and talk about it, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we'll try and ask some people. I think, you know, getting Yuho on again would be awesome.
Yeah.
When he spoke about it initially, version 1. And I know he's got more committed into the Webpack 2 stuff. I know he's working on that a lot. So, yeah, definitely. It'd be really interesting.
Yeah. Sounds good. And Let's Encrypt is on my list, and I can't remember why we're going to talk about it. You've done some interesting stuff.
Yeah, well, actually, that's actually, I mean, obviously, following on from the discussion we've had, anyone now can really have HTTPS encryption and TLS, encryption for your site. And, you really should. I mean, it's silly not to now. And one of the things actually, like Certbot is a very good tool. And in very simple cases, that's the tool, that Let's Encrypt, it provides you, which makes it very easy in very kind of like the normal cases, the norm, if you have an Apache instance or an Nginx instance and you just want it to be verified, because obviously what happens is you have to verify with Let's Encrypt in an automated fashion, it does. So it doesn't give you the top level certificate, but it does let you know that you have access to that DNS, to that actual record, to that actual domain. So, what they're giving you verifying for is legit. So for that kind of typical use case, it's very simple to use something like Certbot with the kind of configurations it provides. But one thing we found, and what we do is, so we have a high level, I can't remember exactly what it is. I think it's the verified HTTPS certificate for live, but in dev mode, we use Let's Encrypt because we want to still be using HTTPS because we want to make sure it's as lifelike, as real as the production environment, but we don't want to have the costs, and the costs are quite expensive of all these certificates and stuff. So what we've done is we ended up, it was actually cheaper for us to split out our domain. So we used to be on one subdomain or one domain, and then we'd have subdomains off that. And Let's Encrypt has a 20 max limit on the subdomains on one single domain. So we ended up, it was cheaper for us to each have our own domain. And then from that, each of those domains, we then, obviously they point to the same server and, it's just within our virtual host file. But in that, then we have encryption and certificates for each individual one of those. And it was the automation process around that. And it proved to be very interesting and very simple, actually, with Certbot to be able to do this. And you can do some very cool manual things, in an automated fashion to a point, and let them deal with a lot of the stuff, but then get these certificates back and use them how you wish. So that's what I was really going to say. Definitely check out the Certbot documentation if you are looking into Let's Encrypt stuff and see what kind of things you can do outside of the norm.
Nice. The only other thing I had on my list, and obviously we cruelly took away the hot picks section of the podcast, which, I think should come back, but... Well,
I think we can. Hey, bud, we're full reign of this show. Let's do it. It's coming back for at least probably one pick today.
Okay.
It's hot picks. What is your hot pick today, bud?
Welcome to Hot Picks. My hot pick today is the Facebook data table for React.
Okay.
Yep.
Have you used it?
Not yet, but no, I have. I'm not joking. No, I have used it this time, and I sort of really struggled to find one that I like, to be honest with you. I used Griddle. I used that for a little while, and it was okay. And I think they updated it, and I didn't find it worked as well. It almost felt like they rushed a release. I found lots of things didn't work. Probably my fault, actually. But anyway, I moved away, and I decided to go for the Facebook one because, to be honest with you, I just felt like it had more chance of the code being supported going down the line. So I used that. Basically, what it gives you is sort of like the styling, and it's got, I guess, kind of like lazy loading type thing. It's not paginated particularly. You scroll down, and you'll keep loading the table rows as you go down. So it's quite nice. But in terms of the sourcing, you have to implement all that yourself, which actually isn't necessarily a bad thing because, it gives you the control whether you're doing it client side, server side, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's okay. It's not the kind of thing you can just drop in. There is some customization you have to do. But I think if you're looking for a data table, I would probably say that's the best one from what I've seen anyway. Yeah, join us next week. Well, actually, don't. There probably won't be another hot picks, but who knows? Yeah.
There'll be a hot pick if there is a hot pick.
Exactly.
We don't want to pressure the hot picks into it if there is no hot pick.
Well, that's it.
It just becomes a pick that isn't hot. Exactly,
Cold picks. Yeah.
But actually, you brought up React there, which is interesting. And one thing that I don't know if we touched upon on the show, I know we've spoken about it off air, was the interesting thing you had with performance and actually realizing that immutable stuff can be very slow.
Yeah.
And I think you were using, JSON encode or stringify to kind of get around the copying these quite deeply nested structures.
Yes.
And you're trying to get, obviously with React, immutable stuff's great because it can be very quick for being able to say, has this changed? Okay, render the new one. And there's obviously these very nice data structures that immutable JS implement, and that you're able to switch over to that, and you found great performance in doing that as opposed to Because I think your way, obviously, I mean, it did come up on Stack Overflow and stuff, so people probably do still use it, and it probably is a good thing to discuss kind of pros and cons of it.
I'm still not using Immutable JS. It's probably my biggest regret from the project is that I didn't use it, but I didn't know much about it at the time. And in fact, when I first started this project, my JavaScript knowledge was minimal, really. And it was a huge regret. Like you say, I was using something I found on Stack Overflow, which was like, just JSON parse, JSON stringify. So then you were essentially getting back a new object. Yeah, it was a deep clone. I didn't know at the time, but obviously it is really performance heavy. So then basically I swapped it out for like a shallow clone. And then I got burnt by that because it was using some things from, some things that some browsers weren't supporting. But now I've got something that is working, basically shallow cloning objects. But yeah, I wish I'd used Immutable JS. That would have been the way forward.
You know, hindsight's 2020, and the thing is realizing that these things aren't cheap. You know, I mean, immutable stuff in the naive fashion. I mean, you do want to, you essentially want to try and do like a deep clone because you want to be like, I want a brand new everything. Yeah. But obviously you don't sometimes because of the fact of performance. You only want the shallow clones. And then immutable JS is great because it really provides you. It takes away all that pain. And you never have to worry about it, and it does it in the most performant way possible. It's very hard now, obviously. Well, I suppose it wouldn't be too hard. I mean, you could slowly refactor, and I suppose that's what you're probably thinking of doing, is refactoring your code base to incorporate it in the key areas, and then you can kind of hopefully infiltrate the whole code base with that and remove the shallow stuff.
Yeah, and on top of that, I actually found, obviously, in your should component update method of React, I found like a lot of tutorials I was following, it was saying, well, when you're comparing two objects, obviously you want to check that the contents is the same. In most circumstances, you want to see if the contents of the objects has changed. So I was then doing, if JSON stringify this object equals this next state object, JSON stringify, and that was also costly. So, I'm having to strip a lot of that out now as well. Again, I'm not a JavaScript expert at all, as this is probably showing, but there are a lot of pitfalls and a lot of performance issues to be aware of, I think, when you're doing this kind of stuff.
Again, it's a whole new domain to understand and kind of comprehend. Testing it in isolation, in development modes, is very different to testing it in real life data and realizing in production and then realizing on mobile devices and realizing all these different processes that you don't have access to because you're just using your dev, you don't really consider it because you're just using your dev box that may be super powerful, or in your case, 1990s hardware because it won't run PHP Storm correctly.
My Amstrad.
Your Amstrad, absolutely, is going to be the problem. And actually, speaking of performance and stuff, this leads on quite well to a topic. So when this comes out, I would have we probably would have released the episode I did with Brian Moses. I'm hoping to kind of upgrade my server setup, and Brian Moses does some really great NAS setups and kind of discussion on that. And he spoke really intelligently about all these really cool topics like RAID, choosing your CPUs, choosing motherboards, what's all these, kind of things you need to consider with servers and stuff last episode. And I kind of continued that on and discussing kind of Intel Core i series versus Xeons and stuff. And there's a really interesting YouTube channel, which I'll put into show notes about. And he goes into kind of this discussion as well and talks more about it in kind of layman terms, which is really what I need. Like, I haven't built PCs or anything for years. So I really wanted to kind of go back down to the root of, okay, well, back in the day it was AMD versus Intel. What's it now? And why is people raving on about Xeons versus i series and stuff? And is my use case, more of a Xeon process based, or is it i series based? And this YouTube video gives a good rundown of that. Kind of, again, like the beauty of building a PC is it's completely up to your use case. There's, infinite, there's no definitive answer. It's really what you want out of it.
So who are the key players now then? Because like you say, I was going to think of Intel and AMD, but...
It's Intel. AMD have released, are starting to kind of come back a little bit. I think they're releasing some new chips, but it is mainly Intel, that you're going to be looking at for these server-based rigs and stuff. I mean, obviously, you've got things like the ARM processors and stuff, but they're much more low-end. Yeah, it's Intel, man. That's it for now.
And are they still, because, when I was, learning about this, they were saying processors, they really kind of got to the point where, they really can't make much better CPUs now, hence the parallel hardware. Are they still getting much better, or has it slowed right down?
Yeah, so Moore's Law has definitely happened. And what seems to happen now is it's 4 gigahertz per core that you're going to get. Really, I think that's like the max. So you can overclock it to a little bit more, maybe, I think, like in certain use cases, but that's really going to be your tippity top. So what you do now is, as you say, you don't expand vertically, you're expanding horizontally. So you're going to have more cores on the chip. They're around about, I think it's like 8 cores on a chip maybe you can get in a Xeon. And typically what you'll do is you'll have like dual processor, dual socket motherboards. You can actually have 2 processors or even more on the motherboard itself. So in that case, you'll get like 16 cores. So it is all about cores. But it is interesting though, because certain use cases require better clock speed. So in the case of like gaming, it's single threaded, so it needs higher clock speed. So you're better off not having like a massively paralleled core processing power. You're better off having a couple of cores that are very quick, as opposed to maybe like file sharing and stuff, which require kind of independent people using the system. That will need more cores, but maybe they can be a bit lower powered. So it's working out what your use cases are, and the things that they are improving on is obviously putting more cores on a chip. Things such as like the speeds, like caches and stuff, increasing cache sizes and things, which is obviously big things. But, the main thing, which was obviously clock speed, has kind of died down a lot because that's all they can do. That's what physically the hardware can actually get to.
I guess the other thing is, like the way it was always portrayed to me was that for many, 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 many years, it was the software guys were chasing the hardware guys saying, oh, come on, get us faster processors, get us more. And now it's turned around and the hardware guys are like, guys, are you actually going to use the extra cores that we're giving you? And
well, this is it. I mean, the thing is it's changed. The landscape's changed. We can't give you faster cores, single cores. What we can do instead is we can say, I can give you more of these cores. So you're going to have to deal and parallelize this in whatever way possible. And that's where, functional programming comes in with immutability and things, and kind of the concept of Erlang and all these different languages and different models like the ACT model, all these things that separate it out, as opposed to what we were specifically doing with immutable OO kind of code that we had. Like enterprise OOE code, which is very much, unless you use things like threading and stuff, you're dealing with it in just a single threaded way, and you just want it to be as quick as possible. But we can't get that anymore. But that's fine. We're kind of, again, expanding out in a different way, and it's on us to use the hardware that we actually have. And I think that's actually one thing I've realized from all this kind of more foraying into it again, is that, I'm a software guy, but you have to appreciate, and it's appreciating the levels below you, appreciating what you're built on, and from even the root level of, okay, well, what does a CPU have? What caching does it have? How does it work? What are all these things? And don't take it for granted, that the power and the work that goes into all these bits that build up to the abstractions that we use, which is just software languages.
Yeah, that is pretty crazy. It'd be interesting to like the commercial operating systems like Mac OS and Windows, how much they've adapted their software to work with these multiple cores. You'd like to think they were on top of it.
One of the interesting use cases that we spoke about was transcoding. So in Plex and these things is, so there's this whole thing actually. So with like video and decoding and things, is you have hardware decoding. So eventually you can get like hardware video decoding, or like, audio decoding, which is actually on a chip. And that's like obviously the best and the most performant, because then that hardware just deals with it. So things such as X264, which is the format's that is used kind of is very much like the winner now. It went from the DivXs and the XVids to now this, and that's I think it's called the AVC, which is the audio video codec, or advanced video codec, sorry. And that is now pretty much in all hardware. So, your TV will probably have a hardware chip that can decode that. So with Plex, it can stream through that whole just, raw original file stream and say, here you go, TV, you can now decode this. But with the newer ones, such as high efficiency VC video codec, and that's the X265, it's a lot newer. It's a lot better. Like, you actually find that the actual quality for the size of the file will be better. So you actually get a lower file size. It's one of those great things where a lower file size, but better quality. And it's like, what? This is insane. And, they've done a better job, but it's not on hardware yet. So all this transcoding has to happen in software. And that puts a lot of emphasis then on your CPUs, because that's primarily single-threaded, all this kind of transcoding. Unless they can kind of somehow, I don't know whether like FFmpeg and things can do more parallelization and stuff, but if it can, that'd be great. But I think particularly it's more single-threaded, so you're putting a lot more burden on your CPU and the software side of things, as opposed to the fact of putting it into hardware.
All I took from that was don't use PHP Storm, but yeah, it's only good.
That is the only thing I think out of all the show. Yeah. And actually, there was one final thing, or two final things actually, I would love to quickly mention. So one thing I would say is the concept of like, we use the date time objects, abstraction in PHP, and we use, and hopefully use like the date time immutable one as well. And you realize the merits of using the immutable one over the normal date time one. But one of the things is actually newing these up, and some really nice in the PHP fashion, everything's a function, and there are aliases actually, like date_create, that will just do the new instance for you. And it provides a bit more of a fluid interface, I find, sometimes, to say if you want to just format something, you do a date create on it and you format it, or, you're able to pipe it, as opposed to like having this weird new, wrapping those in, brackets and doing that. And it's just a nicer way. So I would say, to spend some time having a look at these aliases, as in true PHP fashion, everything's a function, and under the hood, obviously, it's using the same instance kind of things, and, making a new instance of date time and stuff. But there are some nice ones like date create from format and things like that. So I would definitely mention, check them out. And finally, and actually, this is in true Budster fashion, actually, I haven't actually looked at this properly yet, but it's something that came up today on my list, and it's make a Lisp. So I'm really interested in kind of how Lisps are generated and stuff, and how they're created. And they seem to be kind of conceptually quite easy to understand. Building one would be really awesome. And actually, there is a very cool project, and actually there's a couple of videos and stuff that I still need to check out, and I want to check them out this evening. There is about making a Lisp, and what someone's done is they've actually been able to compile together making this certain Lisp in loads of different languages. So there's a language that you'll know or not, and you want to learn a language, learn how to make a Lisp in it and stuff. And actually, that was one thing that Scott Voloshin said when we had him on, was talking about understanding a problem already and then writing it in a new language with new ideas or new concepts and stuff. And I want to get into that concept of understanding how you'd make a Lisp. One of the things he did mention was making a Lisp, and I'd love to do that and then actually look into this. So that'd be something really cool to look into.
Yeah, sounds good. Did you have anything else, or should we wrap it up?
I think we can wrap this up, man. I think we've touched upon political stuff, we've touched upon code, we've touched upon hardware. I don't know what else we could mention other than PHP Storm, rock and roll.
So,
it's for the win.
Join us next week where we'll be discussing the meaning of life. And I think that's it, right?
That is it, man.
All right, well, thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to 3 Devs and a Maybe. You can contact us at contact@3devsandamaybe.com or follow us on Twitter at 3 Devs and a Maybe.